Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and listening into the podcast. I say it all the time, and I will continue to say it. I'm so grateful for you for listening into the podcast. And because you've been such faithful listeners, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. And in this moment of appreciation, I ask you to continue your support. It helps us so much if you take a moment right now and just subscribe to the podcast. That will help us. All right. All right. So now let's get started with today's episode. Today, I'm going to be talking with Meg Crosby. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Meg. Meg is a seasoned strategist, trusted advisor, and champion of culture. She's the co author of the book, Running the Gauntlet: Proven Strategies for High Growth Leaders. Meg is the co founder and principal at PeopleCap Advisors, which advises investors and high growth companies on people strategy, culture, and the challenges associated with rapid growth. Prior to forming PeopleGap, Meg worked at Google, leading the HR MA team. But the thing I really want you to know about Meg, with her deep background in organizational development and executive leadership, Meg brings clarity, compassion, and candor to the often complex world of aligning people with vision. Welcome, Meg Crosby.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Okay, so now you heard me read officially a little bit about you, but why don't you tell us in your own words anything you want to tell us first about you and then the work you do?
Okay, wow. So my background has really been in HR. I started a career in recruiting on Wall Street back in the 90s when it's sort of a bit of a heyday for Wall Street, and then uh, followed my curiosity to the West Coast to join a tech startup in Los Angeles. I really felt at that time, I was 30 years old, and I thought, technology is going to be the hallmark of my generation, and I really want to be a part of that. And so I went and worked for a startup, was the sole practitioner of HR in our 40-person startup. And then we had the great fortune of being bought by Google along the way. And so I went to work for Google. And I think looking back, this was a front row seat for high growth. Google, at the time we joined our little company, Google was right under 1,000 employees. And during the time I was there for about 6 years, it grew from 1,000 to 25,000 employees. And the HR department, I think I was the 14th hire and the first generalist in Google's HR. And when I left 6 years later, there were 800 people in what we called people operations at that time. So I just had an amazing growth experience there and just was a witness to a lot of history. And, a little about me. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was born and raised here. I came back to Memphis because I came back for the weekend and someone set me up on a blind date. That's how I met my husband, and he had two young children. So we were going to be firmly planted here in Memphis. So I've now been back here for 20 years. I've had a great experience being back here, and it's allowed me to really get my hands dirty in a lot of different things. I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits, a lot of community service initiatives, and that's allowed me to exercise sort of the entrepreneurial spirit that I have as well. And I started PeopleCap with my partner Howard when I moved back here after the birth of my son, so in 2000, maybe 2010, and wanted to really bring these exciting new talent management initiatives that we were seeing on the coast to the interior of the country to Memphis. And so it was exciting, and it's been great fun to work with companies here.
Okay, you've said so much. My brain is racing.
Okay, it's a
Many
lot.
questions. You can't see them. The questions are passing before my eyes right now.
That's right.
Okay.
You want to know
All
where
right.
we went on our blind date? Is that it?
Now, believe it, that's like the third on the list.
Okay.
But yes, I love that story. I love that love story. and your whole journey. But the first thing I want to talk about, which is I think the first question that popped in my mind, when you started your journey, you said you were led by curiosity.
Yes.
Now, I think that's a gem for somebody listening already, because there might be somebody who's thinking, I've always been curious about X, Y, and Z. And they may be in a place where they're thinking about, they're at a crossroads and what can I do now? And that I think is a real clue on where you can get some information. So let's talk about that moment a little more. You gave us an overview, but tell us again what you did and how it ended up.
Okay, well, I'm gonna be really candid. I'll tell you this. It's kind of a funny story in our family, but I wanted to live in New York. I had an aunt that had lived there, and so after college, I wanted to find a job in New York, and I didn't really care what the job was, but I had an uncle who was in finance. I was an English major, so I had an uncle who was in finance, and he set me up with some courtesy interviews with some investment banks. And back then, this is before the internet, before email. Like I didn't even know what an investment bank did, And here I was flying blind, and I'd had several of these courtesy interviews. And on about the fourth or fifth one, I got off the elevator in this huge Manhattan skyscraper, this little girl from Tennessee, and I walk in, and there's a sign in the elevator bank that says, HR this way, special events this way. And so I go in and meet with the HR person doing the courtesy interview, and they said, "Well, what would you like to do?" And we talked through some things, and then I said, just out of curiosity, what is special events? And they said, "Oh, well, that's the department that plans all of the closing dinners and the recruiting events and the big conferences that we do. It's the golf outings, client entertainment, all those things." And I said, "Oh, that's perfect. I was a sorority president. I got that." I was like, I can do that. And so I said, "Well, are there any openings in that?" And they said, "Actually, yes, we have an opening." And so I applied for and got that job. And that was how I began my illustrious Wall Street career, was as a party planner. And I think and it was out of curiosity for what is that department, what is that sign saying? And if not for that sign in the elevator bank, I who knows where I'd be today. So
So was that your first sort of professional role
that was my first role in New York.
in New York?
I had done some work for a nonprofit in Memphis for a couple of years, but that was my entry into New York and into Wall Street. And from there, I continued to work at the firm and moved into recruiting, which led me to HR. And that just, it was the first step along the path.
How'd you get from recruiting, I mean, from events to recruiting? You said
Well,
that very casually, like that's like the natural next step. Like,
well,
you do events and then you do recruiting.
You know, one of the great things, and I always tell young people who are getting started in their career, one of the great things about working for a really big company is the opportunities that are afforded inside the business, because there's so many different things. You can't even imagine all the corporate jobs that exist. And so when you're in there and you're meeting people and working with people, you see these other jobs. I happen to plan events for the recruiting team. So we would do on-campus events, or we would have a super Saturday, and I would be in charge of, some of the dinners or the meals or all those kinds of things. And so got to know that team really well. And one of the leaders of that team was leaving. She was having a baby, and she came to me and said, "We'd really like you to move over to our team and take this on and head up, this particular, the investment banking recruiting piece." And so that's how it happened. It was very organic and natural, and just through that kind of internal client relationship,
Yeah.
which was great, really easy.
Yeah, and it's a good illustration of when you do good work in one area, people recognize it and
Yeah.
invite you, then that could be an opening for another area that you didn't even think about.
And I'll tell you too, at the time, my boss said, "Why do you want to move into recruiting? Um, what interests you about that?" And I said, "Well, I think it's interesting, but also in my career, I am a special events planner. I'm one of a group. And when I move over there, I will be the head of investment banking recruiting for undergrads." And I said, "I've always wanted to be a V instead of an A." And he said, "Fair enough." So, So, there was sort of this moment of moving. And I also think my curiosity at that point, I began to understand what the investment bank did and was about. And I wanted to get closer to the business. We were planning parties, but that gave me a window into what kinds of business the bank conducted and what I wanted to learn more about. And so by moving into recruiting, I was learning more. And then I left recruiting and moved into an actual investment banking group as a chief of staff. So there were these logical moves, but I think curiosity was really at the center of always trying to get closer to the inner workings of the business.
Love that. And you mentioned before you moved into the chief of staff role, it was for undergrads. You were recruiting for undergrads, is
Yes.
that right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I have a special heart for undergrads because you may know I'm a university professor. And so when you mentioned undergrads, I was like, oh,
Yes. Oh, I know.
I
They're
I
great.
had I had fond feelings. All right. So now you went to the chief of staff. We're eventually going to get to people cap. We're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna jump up in a minute, but I like to stay in the early years because when people are at transition times in there or at crossroads, they think people who have accomplished like you have, you kind of were born there. You know what I
Right.
mean? They
Yeah.
don't,
Right.
they think it's been
Right.
easy or short, and we don't always get to hear the journey. So that's why I'm spending a little time there, but we'll get there before too long. Now, chief of staff is not something that I'm imagining people hear that role every day. Just tell us a little bit about what that role was for you.
Well, I was in a group of bankers. It was about 100 bankers that focused on, they were called the East Coast Industrials Group. So back then, these were bankers that were focused on companies that were industrial companies, mostly based in and around the East Coast. We also had an office in Chicago that I worked closely with. And so my job was actually staffing all of the projects that came in. And so basically what that was I was the least popular person on the planet because everyone was already overworked and I was the person that had to call them on, Friday afternoon and tell them to cancel their weekend plans and that they were going to be spending the time in the office doing this work. So it was not a glamorous job. I did learn a lot about investment banking and but it was a hard job in that I was the liaison from between the junior staff who was, perpetually overworked and, working 80, 100 hours a week and the senior staff, who had a little more flexibility and cachet in their life. And they were the big bankers that everyone aspired to be. So it was challenging. It was challenging at times, for sure.
Sounds like it. All right. And so then from there, where'd you go?
Well, so I turned 30 when I was in that job, and prior to that, on a personal level, I lost my dad at a really in an accident, and that was really catastrophic for me personally, and super unexpected. But like most things, causes you to examine your life and think about where you are, where you want to be, purpose and meaning, is this all there is kind of thing. And so I started to think about that and felt a call to move into technology and got an offer to move out to the West Coast. And also at that time, I felt like I'd been in New York for 6 years. I'd worked hard, played hard. That's what you do in New York. But when you hit 30, you're starting to think, or I was, about really having a life that's more sustainable and building community and building roots and doing things like, I don't know, exercising and going to church and things that didn't happen naturally in Manhattan for me. And so moving out to California seemed like it would provide a sort of a different quality of life. And I really did find that there. It was a much more healthy and well-rounded experience moving out to California.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do understand what you mean when you have those sort of life-changing moments, even a deep loss like that, it's difficult and it does bring those questions up about, what's this life all about? I had a similar situation around that age too, so I understand that. But did you know someone in California? I understand the impulse to want more, but out of all the places, what was happening in
Yeah,
California
so
then?
Well, a guy that I had worked with at the investment bank, he had been a part of our 2-year analyst program. And he left to join a startup on the West Coast in Santa Monica and came back, a year or two later to visit and said, "Hey, we need an HR person. Why don't you come out and why don't you come out and do this?" And so that I really, for me, I didn't know anyone in LA, so it was a real, leap of faith, if you will. But I was ready to leave New York, and I was ready for adventure. And I think coming back to that curiosity, I was very curious about the tech space, and I was excited, so I just jumped.
I love that. I love that. Did you know before then you had that curiosity about the tech space when you were doing all the other roles, or did it come back to you during that time?
It was something that I learned about during my experience at the investment bank, because during that time we were building out a tech practice and it was very popular, and everyone around me was very excited about it, wanted to work in that practice. And it was very clear that this new frontier that was just going to be really big. And during that time, I mean, this is definitely dating me, but during my time at the investment bank, I had my first email account. That was the first time we had email. And in the beginning, it was just internal to the bank. So it wasn't even external. But it's one of those things where it changed overnight how we worked. You will laugh at this, but like we had a whole department called Pres Tech, Presentation Technologies. And if you wanted to, we didn't have PowerPoint. You had to sort of put it all together and then take it down. If you had a deadline, you had to go like 3 days before and drop off your notes and work with someone who is a graphic designer to get them to put it into a presentation format. So it sounds crazy now because now we all have PowerPoint, but that was not a thing. So,
There's
you
so
know,
much we had to do before we had the
yes.
the technologies of
But I
today.
think
Yeah.
all of that happening and being able to use those technologies just excited me, and yeah, piqued my curiosity.
All right. So that brought you to California. All right.
Yeah.
We're moving along in the journey. So led by curiosity and sort of a renewed or a new passion for this new thing in technology. And once again, someone recognized, I'm hearing this through line in your story, someone recognized your gifts, I would say, and say, hey, why don't you come help us do this? In the other role, somebody said, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you come help? Like they knew there was something about you that could help them do the thing they wanted to do. All right, so you're in California. Now what?
Oh man, California was great. Palm trees, sunshine, beach, mountains, it was
Yeah, I
great.
li I live in California. In fact, not too
Oh,
far from Google. Yeah.
oh, good. Okay. Well, it was a great experience. The startup that I joined was founded by two guys who graduated from Caltech, and it was every stereotype you can imagine. I think on my first day, someone walked in with a wetsuit and a surfboard, and it was, for me, coming from Tennessee by way of New York, it was completely different experience. But I love that. I've always said I people have told me I'm a connector, a natural connector of people, and I would also say I'm a collector of people. I love all sorts of different people. So for me, it was a great fun to get to meet all these folks. And it was really my first exposure to software engineers. And that's just a completely different, I'll tell you, just to illustrate, at the investment bank, when you wanted to motivate bankers to do something, you just paid them to do it. If you needed them to show up for recruiting or work long hours, you just threw money at the problem, and that was easy. But I remember having this conversation with a software engineer, one of the guys who founded the company, and I said, I don't really understand what motivates you. What motivates you? You work all the time. What is it?" And he said, "Oh, that's easy. I want to be immortal through my code." I just I think my jaw just dropped on the floor. Like, um, you know, that's awesome. I just don't know how to motivate that. Like, that's a challenge for me being in HR. But that was his purpose. That was his higher purpose, is to develop something that would outlast him. And so really interesting, totally different cultures.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it's interesting to know, which you knew from your background, that different people have different motivators, and
Yes,
money is not always a motivator. Just have to
correct.
find what the thing is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So you did say that then Google bought out that company, and then bring us now, move us toward how you got to People Cap.
Sure. So, moved back home to Memphis, and had a baby. Spent a couple years getting my child to age 2 or so, and realized that I am not cut out to be a stay-at-home mom. Lucky for my child, he and I both needed more socialization. I think after 2 years, and so ran into some friends that I hadn't seen in a while, who had very complementary skill sets. And one in particular, my business partner and my co-author, Howard Cleveland. Howard had been a labor and employment attorney. So he had sort of come at people and culture through the litigation side. He saw what happened when poor management built a terrible culture, and he wanted to work less on litigation, but more upstream. And how do we solve those problems before they get to litigation? And I was fresh off this very extraordinary, groundbreaking culture of technology on the West Coast. And so we kind of blended our skills and went to work consulting for uh, companies and organizations, some based here in Memphis and some elsewhere. And we found our way ultimately to working with private equity companies and their high growth portfolio companies that they've invested in.
And would you say uh, making that decision to do that work, even with the partner and you're on your own, how was that to make the decision to do that for you? Was it an easy decision, challenging? You had to think about it. Was it a natural flow
You
into
know,
doing that work? Yeah.
I was ready to do that and to do something entrepreneurial. And I think part of that maybe rubbed off on me from being, on the West Coast where all these startups were happening. And you just think, well, why not? They're starting up. Why can't I? I might as well start something too. That just seemed like a good idea. Having said that, I probably should have thought more about it. There are certainly ways that we stubbed our toe and didn't do things the right way for a long time. I have plenty of examples and meet often with people who are starting a consulting business. And I tell them, like, please spend an hour with me so I can tell you all the mistakes I made and tell you what not to do. I will save you so much time. So there were a lot of challenges to doing that work. But I think ultimately it has been a great journey and, culminating in where we are today with the book.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it sounds like it. All right. So you mentioned the book. Tell us a little bit about the premise of the book or the main thought in the book.
Sure. Well, the book is about an organizational growth methodology that we developed along the way. And so essentially, we worked with lots of private equity backed companies. And for your listeners, when a company receives investment, that investment is meant to be a catalyst for growth. So, in other words, we're investing this money so that you can get to the next stage of growth and scale in your business. And that can mean a lot of things. It can mean investing in systems, in people. Many times there are new leaders added. It can mean professionalizing the business. It could mean new markets, product and technology upgrades. It can mean a lot of different things, but it's generally a catalyst for growth. And in working with our clients, we recognize that there were, from our perspective, the organizational growth side of things, there were sort of 6 buckets that their issues tended to fall into. And so we began looking at that framework. We call that the 6 imperatives for growth. And we began to, when we would engage with our clients, we would talk through each of these 6 and kind of try to understand where they were and their challenges in each of those. And those are, we start at the top with sharp and focused. What's your vision, your strategy, your purpose for this business? And is it tight? Is it clear? Does everybody understand that? Are there, for those that they do understand that, is there a goal setting framework? Are people marching forward towards this North Star in a real concerted effort? The next is calibrate culture. Do you have the culture that you need to support the business? Are there things that you need to sharpen? For example, moving from a real ad hoc reactive startup to a more buttoned up, accountable organization requires a little bit of change in the culture. So do you have the culture that you need? And, is that culture defined? Those core values, do people understand what the culture is? Next is strengthen leadership. Do you have the right leadership that you need, the right people around the table to execute on that strategy and that culture? Elevate talent is the fourth one. You can't outperform your talent, and a lot of companies start with young uh, talent. We see a lot of families working together. We call it convenient talent. Anybody you can pull in to do the work, and as you grow, you bring on more expertise, more specialists, and so making that shift. The third one is align structures. What are your organizational structures, your processes, making sure those are aligned with your strategy. And then the final one is amplify communication. Communication is something that becomes more and more, like all of these, more and more complex as you grow and add more people to the mix. So we came up with those 6 imperatives, and then we charted them across 4 stages of growth. And the 4 stages of growth are that emergent stage, that startup or ad hoc stage. The next stage is operationalize. That's when you start to formalize and professionalize your business. Then you move into thrive, which is you're capturing market share. All systems are go. You're winning in that stage. And then you move to the fourth stage, which is explore and expand. If you've had this success, then you can look up from your work and set your eyes on the horizon and think about what's next. New markets, acquisitions, new geographies. What is next to continue to grow, but perhaps in a different way? And so we charted those across the 4 stages of growth, and that is our model. And the book really talks about trying to find out where you are on that journey for our entrepreneurs and being able to see what's next, what's coming next, and how they level up from one stage to the next.
I think it's a interesting framework, and thank you for sharing that. Uh, I'm guessing there's some entrepreneurs who are listening who are probably maybe early stage or mid stage who could take some insights from the conversation, but can go ahead and get the book to get the fuller picture of that. But the framework reminds me of something you can also do with your sort of personal growth and development for someone who I imagine is listening, maybe at a point in their career where they're at a crossroads and trying to determine which way to go. So I see some universal ways to use the strategy.
Absolutely. And I think also we use the 6 imperatives when we're coaching leaders, and we tell CEOs, have these 6 on a post-it note on your, monitor, because you're always learning, you're always investing in these. You always are needing to sharpen your focus. You're always needing to elevate your talent. What am I doing today to work on these things? It gives them kind of a blueprint for how to lead their organization and where to focus. A lot of
Yeah,
people are not clear when it comes to people leadership, what they should be doing, and I think this offers a blueprint.
it sounds like it does. And we're all people. We need even our self leadership.
That's right. And
That's
and
right.
our one of our taglines or basic premises is people drive results. People are at the heart of every company. And so if you don't get the people right, that the whole talent piece right, you're probably not going to succeed.
Yes, yes. Now, you may know that this podcast, well, it's leadership purpose, but it's for what I call high achieving women, women who are responsible, uh, ambitious in a positive way, good at a couple things. They're the ones that are supporting others professionally. People come to them for advice in their personal life, whether it's the community or the neighborhood or the family and friends. They come to her for advice, whether it's a part of her background or not.
Right,
So, with
right.
any of these, a combination of things is a kind of, I'm characterizing what I'm calling a high achieving woman. All right. And so now she's successful. Everything is good. Everything is good on paper. Um, by everybody's outside view of her life, nothing to complain about, but she is now unfulfilled and she's at a crossroads in her career. Like, there must be more. She finds herself asking, there must be more. So, this is who this conversation is for today. So, with that woman in mind, what's something from your career journey, which I'm sure she's gained so much from just hearing about it, but what's something from your career journey or from your professional life? Um, as a word of wisdom or encouragement or anything you would leave with her, uh, just as something to take away from the episode today.
Oh, sure. I was thinking about this question before we spoke, and it reminded me of a a theologian that I follow, Richard Rohr, who is I think he's a Franciscan um, monk, actually. And he wrote a book about the second half of life and kind of how you sort of get your head right and lead with purpose, in that second half of life. And one of the things that was really powerful that he said that I've tried to embrace is the notion of giving your power away. And I think it's really counterintuitive to practice giving your power away because the first half of life we work so hard to get that power. It seems strange to give it away, but I think that watching some of my other high achieving friends give their power away, I think it's really important. And what I mean by that is it can be as simple as delegating, giving someone a task, someone who's coming up behind you who can then learn from that and then be more supportive of you. So your quality of life can maybe get better. It can be promoting someone, it can be lifting up others. I get tremendous satisfaction and joy from just complimenting and promoting other people and recognizing them and rewarding them for the hard work that they do. And I think all of those are ways that we get joy out of out of the work and joy and purpose for that. But looking at those around us to see where we can give up our power. I think one of the ways I've had the privilege of sitting on a lot of nonprofit boards, as probably several of your listeners have through their work, and um, I think it's great to add, young board members and put them in positions of responsibility and to help them, but to recognize I don't need the title, I don't need the notoriety or anything that comes with that, but let me put this younger person in there who can really benefit from that title and put that on their resume, and that's gonna make a difference for them in that first half of their career. So I think that that's something that's meant a lot to me, giving away your power.
Giving away your power. That's a new perspective. I haven't heard that. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So now, is there anything I didn't get a chance to ask you or think about that's been on your mind or that's popping into your head right now, that you want to say, oh, wait, I have one more thing before we tell people how they can be in touch with you?
Well, I have one story that was kind of in my mind. I think when we think about both the Growth Gauntlet, our book, and leading with purpose, I think it's become really clear to me that everyone has value, and everyone wants to be valued. And we all have times where we're in the wrong job or we're in the wrong situation and things aren't working, but for reasons, because especially high achievers, we just keep knocking on that door. We just keep moving forward. We can't get off the hamster wheel. It's hard to take a look at what we're doing. um, I think it's really important to find what lights you up and gives you some great enthusiasm, and also where you can be valued for your talents and your gifts, where those align with your gifts. And I have kind of a funny story where I first learned this when I was at the investment bank really early in my career. The first person that I had to fire was a guy who was a 2-year analyst. He'd gone to like an Ivy League school, and we never fired anyone because it was a 2-year program. So everyone made it for 2 years. So by the time people realized you weren't performing, it was time to go anyway. And so when his manager came to me and said, we have to get rid of this guy, he's spending all his time in the corporate gym, he's not doing the work, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is where, for me, it was dead man walking. I just, for a week and a half before it happened, I just couldn't sleep. And I thought his life would be over. And so we went through with it, fired him. Terrible. And then a couple months later, I was on a plane from New York to San Francisco, and I was reading my favorite magazine, Vanity Fair. And I'm flipping through, and lo and behold, it is the same guy, and he's on like a 6-page spread as a male model. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the best thing I ever did was fire this guy. right? Like he should never have been in investment banking. He should have been at the gym. This is his calling. And I actually ran into him later and at a music festival when I lived in LA, and I said, "Oh my gosh, hello!" And he said, "You fired me." I said, "I know. It's the best thing that ever happened to you." And he said, "Yes. In fact, he was recently enrolled in USC Film School." You
Oh,
know, and so all that is to say, I think that people often find themselves in the wrong spot. And so when I talk about people changing jobs, I use the term liberate. You've got to liberate people. If you're not valuing them or they're not valuing the experience, then they're in the wrong spot. They need a chance to thrive, and so does the business. So find a humane way to part ways and put them on the right path, you know.
yeah.
And I think we can take that, we can also take that for ourselves, which is if you're frustrated and it's not going well and you're leaking too much energy in your unhappiness, then you probably are in the wrong spot and need to think about a new plan.
Yes, and I'm imagining that's a story that we won't forget anytime soon.
Good.
I just imagined him as a male model in there. But I agree with everything you're saying. It is a liberation. And sometimes we have to, like in his case, he wouldn't have known otherwise. He had to start somewhere. Sometimes we want to do the exact right, perfect thing. Sometimes we just have to try something. And then if we find ourselves, like in his case, drifting away from the actual job and doing something else, it's an indicator.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sometimes go out there and do it. So, thank you for sharing that story and all that you shared here today in your wonderful, rich career journey. Really appreciate you for being here. Now, where can people follow you and hear more about you and or your book?
Sure. Well, I am on LinkedIn, Meg Thomas Crosby. And our book, we also have a People Cap Advisors page on LinkedIn. We have a website, which is www.peoplecap.com. And all of my contact information is on there as well. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from folks.
Okay, and we'll be sure to have that in the show notes. Meg, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robin.
Okay, everyone, I'd love to hear your response to this episode. Just message me on LinkedIn, any of the social media channels, but I'm especially hang out on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.